Every prepper has the same fantasy. The moment things go bad, they grab their bug-out bag, jump in their truck, and disappear into the wilderness. They've watched the videos. They've bought the gear. They have a spot picked out somewhere in the mountains, far from the chaos of collapsing cities. It sounds perfect. It sounds logical, and it will get most of them killed. I'm about to challenge everything the survival industry has sold you for the last 20 years. The bug-out myth isn't just flawed. It's a dangerous delusion that gives people false confidence while ignoring the brutal mathematics of mass evacuation and wilderness survival. By the end of this video, you'll understand why staying put might be the smartest decision you ever make. Let's start with the fantasy. You hear the emergency alert, or maybe the power just dies and doesn't come back. You've prepared for this. You grab your 72-hour bag, the one you've carefully assembled with water filters, fire starters, emergency food, first aid supplies. You load the family into the vehicle. You have a full tank of gas because you always keep it above half. You pull out of your driveway and head for the hills. Within hours, you're safe in the wilderness, while the unprepared masses tear each other apart in the cities. Now, let's talk about reality. Problem number 1. Everyone has the same plan. Every prepper, every survivalist, every person who's ever watched a disaster movie, they all have the same idea. Get out of the city. Head for the country. Find somewhere remote. Now think about what that means mathematically. A major metropolitan area has millions of people. Let's say only 10% of them decide to evacuate. That's still hundreds of thousands of vehicles, all trying to use the same roads, at the same time, going the same direction. Away from the city, toward the countryside. Hurricane Katrina showed us what this looks like. Houston evacuated before Hurricane Rita, and 3 million people hit the roads simultaneously. Traffic moved at 2 miles per hour. People ran out of gas, sitting in gridlock. Over 100 people died in the evacuation itself, not from the storm, from the evacuation. And that was an organized, government-coordinated event with days of warning. In a sudden collapse scenario, there is no coordination. There is no warning. There are just millions of panicked people with the same idea, clogging every road out of the city until nothing moves at all. Your bug-out vehicle becomes a metal coffin sitting in traffic while the situation around you deteriorates by the hour. Problem number 2. You're not as prepared as you think. The survival industry has made billions of dollars selling gear. Bug-out bags, water filters, fire starters, tactical this, survival that. And most of it sits in closets, never tested, never truly understood. Here is a question. When was the last time you actually lived out of your bug-out bag? Not a weekend camping trip with backup. Supplies in the car. Actually survived using only what's in that bag. Filtered water from a questionable source and drank it. Started a fire in the rain. Navigated without GPS. Slept outside without a tent. The gap between owning survival gear and knowing how to survive is enormous. Military special forces train constantly, and they still face high casualty rates in survival situations. The average suburban prepper with a YouTube education and untested equipment is not going to suddenly become a wilderness expert because the lights went out. Wilderness survival is a full-time skill that takes years to develop. It requires intimate knowledge of local plants, water sources, weather patterns, and terrain. It demands physical conditioning that most desk workers don't have, and it assumes you'll be alone, which brings us to the next problem. Problem number 3. You won't be alone out there. Remember those hundreds of thousands of people fleeing the city? The ones who made it past the traffic, who had enough gas, who knew roughly where they were going? They're all heading to the same places you are. State parks, national forests, rural areas, the countryside, that remote cabin you've been dreaming about. There will be 50 other people with the same idea, all arriving at the same time, all desperate, all armed. The peaceful wilderness retreat becomes a conflict zone. Resources that might sustain one family for months won't last a week when shared among dozens of desperate strangers. Rural communities aren't naive. They know that city people will flood out during a crisis. Many of them have already made plans for that scenario, and those plans don't involve welcoming refugees with open arms. They involve roadblocks, checkpoints, turning people away. By force if necessary. You're not bugging out to safety. You're bugging out to a different kind of danger, one where you're the outsider, the unknown threat, the competition for limited resources. Problem number 4. The journey itself is deadly. Let's say you beat the traffic. You made it out of the city while roads were still moving. Now you're driving through increasingly rural areas, your vehicle loaded with supplies, your family inside. You look like exactly what you are, a target. Criminals aren't stupid. They know that evacuation routes become hunting grounds, disabled vehicles, people who ran out of gas, families who stopped to rest, easy prey. And in a true collapse scenario, there's no one to call for help. No police response. No highway patrol. Just you, your family, and whoever decided you have something worth taking. The romanticized bug-out scenario never includes the broken-down vehicle with no mechanic available, the medical emergency with no hospital for 100 miles, the wrong turn that leads into hostile territory, the reality of traveling through chaos with everything you own visible and vulnerable. Problem number 5. Your home is your strongest position. This is the part the bug-out fantasy ignores completely. Your home, even a modest one, offers advantages that no wilderness campsite or hastily reached cabin can match. Shelter, real shelter, walls that stop wind and rain, a roof that doesn't leak, doors that lock, windows you can secure, climate control, even passive climate control that keeps you alive in extreme temperatures, supplies, not what fits in what fits in, backpack, what fits in a house, weeks or months of food if you've prepared, tools, medical supplies, clothing, comfort items that matter more than survivalists want to admit. Knowledge. You know your neighborhood. You know which neighbors can be trusted. You know where the water shutoffs are, where supplies might be found, how to navigate without thinking. This local knowledge is irreplaceable and impossible to replicate in an unfamiliar location. Community. Your neighbors are potential allies, people you've lived near for years, whose children played with yours, who borrowed your tools and returned them. These relationships, built over time, are survival resources that can't be packed in a bag. Defensibility. A house is infinitely more defensible than a tent. You can fortify it. You can establish sight lines. You can create barriers. You can sleep without wondering if someone is creeping up on your campsite. The concept is called bugging in, and it's what actual emergency management professionals recommend for most scenarios. Shelter in place, harden your position, conserve resources, wait for the situation to stabilize. But what about the scenarios where staying isn't possible? House fire, chemical spill, flood zone. Yes, there are situations where evacuation is necessary. The difference is between planned, targeted evacuation to a specific safe location and the fantasy of grabbing a bag and heading for the hills. If you must relocate, the destination should be predetermined, secured, and stocked. A relative's house in a smaller town, a property you own or have legal access to, somewhere specific, not the wilderness as a vague concept. And the trigger to leave should be early, before the masses start moving, before roads become parking lots. The bug-out bag itself isn't useless. It's useful for getting home if you're away when something happens. It's useful for the specific evacuation scenarios I mentioned. It's useful as a supplement to a larger preparedness strategy. What it's not useful for is the fantasy of wilderness survival that the industry has sold you. Here is what the survival gear companies won't tell you. The most important prep isn't a bag you can carry. It's the position you've built, the home you've fortified, the supplies you've stored, the skills you've practiced, the relationships you've cultivated, the local knowledge you've accumulated. You can buy that in a store, you can't pack it in a backpack, and you certainly can't replicate it by fleeing to an unfamiliar location during the worst possible moment. The bug-out fantasy persists because it's exciting. It appeals to our desire for adventure, for self-reliance, for the romantic notion of man against nature. It sells products, it generates content, and it gives people a false sense of security that requires almost no real sacrifice or preparation. Real preparedness is boring. It's storing water in your garage. It's building relationships with neighbors. It's learning to fix things instead of replacing them. It's understanding your local environment intimately. It's accepting that you might spend a crisis in your own house, uncomfortable but alive, rather than dying heroically in the wilderness. The collapse log doesn't care about your fantasy. The collapse log cares about what actually works, and what works is understanding that your home, your neighborhood, your community, these are assets. Abandoning them to chase a myth is not survival. It's suicide with extra steps. When the grid goes down, when society fractures, the survivors won't be the ones who ran. They'll be the ones who stayed, who dug in, who made their position stronger instead of abandoning it, who understood that bugging out isn't a plan. It's the absence of one. This is the collapse log. The fantasy ends here. Reality begins now.